All right, everyone. I'm Jeff Kubiak with the Better Learning Podcast, and I'm so excited today to have a good friend of mine who is above and beyond brain power for most people. And the work she's doing, I'm so excited to share because it does involve the architects, the designers, the school leaders, and so much more. But it's Dr. Sabba Quidwai, and let's let you introduce yourself and share what you're doing. She is the CEO of Designing Schools. Sabba, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, so excited. So why don't you give us a little bit of take us on a little tour of your kind of your trek that brought you where you are today, because I think it's so important that you've been into a lot of different fields that have helped curate where you are.
Yeah, definitely. I always say, I think one of the things that's so interesting for me at this moment is I come to this work. I mean, I've had many roles, but I feel like I come to this work really from the lens of a learner, like a student, like a graduate, somebody navigating that time. Because as I reflect back, I don't know how this ended up happening, but I graduated during like two really big, like world crises, big like shifts, kind of like how we're seeing right now. And both of them were completely different. So the first one, when I graduated my undergrad, I started as a high school history teacher, 2007. And a couple months later, I'm sure many people remember, was the recession. So like with my first job came my first layoff notice. So it's really interesting to even just read a lot of the commentary today around entry level jobs and layoffs and whatnot, as if it's like something brand new. But I think, with each iteration, as time has gone on, I think in general, it has become harder and harder and harder. And now it's just so in our faces, you can't ignore it anymore. So, first job, first layoff notice. And what was so interesting about 2007, when you reflect back, is it was the year the iPhone came out. And I think, back then, if people had told us like, oh, people are going to be like, be these like YouTube influencers, and we're going to be like using social media in this way, and we're going to be communicating and working mobile and doing, it would have sounded so crazy
Yeah.
and just so out there that we like, or the app economy is going to do XYZ. Like, even that term, like the app economy, today we go through a gazillion apps in a day without even thinking twice. So it's interesting over time how technology normalizes. Whereas back then, I knew nothing about technology. Like, I had no clue what people were building. I had no clue about anything at all. All I knew was like, there was a group of people over here making a ton of money. And then there was me and a bunch of other people losing homes, losing jobs, all these other kinds of things. Again, similar to what you see today, but at scale today, I think. And then, fast forward a couple of years, I obviously learned more about technology, the role it could play, and it had a really big, impact on my life, not only in terms of what I was able to bring to the kids in my classroom and like voice and getting them to express themselves in different ways and how it strengthened thinking and all of those other pieces, but for myself, like I always say like technology gave my kids like a voice to share how they were learning, but it gave me a
Yeah.
voice to share who I am and what I was interested in too. So it was like the simultaneously both things happening. And I feel like getting more into speaking, getting more into sharing ideas, these were things that I just was not able to effectively do, I think, on paper or as a writer, but I was good at doing via video and audio and things like that. And so, that led to like, working at USC for a couple of years, doing one-to-one iPad stuff there. But then obviously Apple was really like the big moment for me because as a high school history teacher, you think you're going to be in a classroom your whole life, Like I remember in 2007 when I graduated, I decorated that place like it was my forever home. And to take all of that down just a couple months later, it's jarring. And so when I went to Apple, it was like, wow, like how come nobody, like, how did this happen? And that's really when I became more interested in the research and going back. Like I think I just had some flexibility of time as well to go back and be like, okay, I want to like study more, like how, like, why do we graduate so unprepared? How come nobody tells us these things? And we knew at that time AI was going to be the next big shift. I had read a really good book in 2014 called The Second Machine Age. And I love the last line. The last line was, technology is not destiny. We shape our destiny. And you
Wow.
can say over the last decade, I've become really obsessed with that question. Yeah, how do we shape our destiny? And a big part
Right.
of that is, how do we have agency over our own lives? So the second time I graduated in 2020, totally different, right? But again, pandemic. I went to school in 2017, so I didn't plan to graduate during a crisis. But in 2020, we had the pandemic, but it wasn't just the pandemic, it was remote work. So again, you have this huge shift, except that time, because my own knowledge about technology and the world and everything was there, even though my school didn't give it to me per se, I was able to figure it out on my own. And I think that's the big thing we try to put in front of people today is don't wait for organizations and places to tell you what's coming. Be the person who knows how to look at your own self, your own environment, and kind of figure it out what's going to work for you.
Yeah, yeah, that's powerful. So the Better Learning podcast is the official podcast for the organization called A4LA, the Association for Learning Environments. And so we have builders, architects, designers, interior people, facilities, business officials, school officials, leaders, teachers. And so give us, Dr. Sabba Quidwai, what is one thing that gives you hope about the future of education?
Ooh. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story about a district that we just worked with because I think if you want hope, you need to go visit some schools. Like you need to get out of the news, out of social media, and you need to go visit some schools and watch what people are doing with real people. You have all the
Agreed.
hope in the world that you need. And I always say I'm really grateful to have had that experience because it definitely drives a lot of my optimism. So we just worked with a district, a Roseville Joint Union High School District. And the assistant superintendent, Dr. Caroz, and her team brought together like a design team. And it consisted of students, of educators, of counselors, of board members, of teachers, principals. All your stakeholders were present in this. And not only did we have this design team, we did a bunch of surveys and focus groups, but they had two goals. Number one, they wanted to build a profile of a graduate. Now, very common. We see profiles of a graduate all over the
Sure.
place.
Yeah.
However, what made their profile a little bit unique was as they looked at those qualities and capabilities and characteristics, they did a bunch of work to land on which qualities and characteristics they wanted. But once they landed on those characteristics, they looked at what does it look like to exemplify that quality with people? So, for example, what does it mean to practice communication, collaboration, advocacy with people? And what does it mean to practice the skill set with AI? And so being able to have that dual lens with which to look through what kind of learners do we want to be? And also keeping in mind that these were not characteristics just for students. This was for the community. So how do we interact with people? How do we interact with AI? And then how do we measure those things? What are we seeing that tells us we're going in the right direction? What are we hearing to let us know that yes, these qualities are being developed? And what are people producing? And so it was this really beautiful intersection over just 3 sessions, 3 half-hour days as how long it took to do this work. So a lot of times people think like we need hours and hours and hours and months and months and months. 3 half-hour days of
Yep.
just good quality conversation, extracting all of this. And it's just one of the things that was so awesome was when they were doing their final reflections. In the beginning, so many of them had walked in with anxiety, frustration, thinking AI was cheating, but they all left with, in their words, hope. And their
Mm.
message, we had this kind of like final, we did a lot of videos and things because they're launching it this coming school year. And one of their biggest messages was create more hope. Like, stop talking about all the things that are going to go wrong and let's start telling people the things that can go right and build towards what can go right. And to see that message come from the students and just to hear, I think being able to, those different groups, stakeholders, being able to hear the different perspectives, it was so refreshing and so enlightening, but you could just see it in their faces and their experiences and their interactions, how much of a difference it makes when we don't design in silos and instead we design with people.
Oh, I love that. So these amazing students, I'm hoping all 4 grades were included. And so did they apply? How were they chosen? Lottery?
Yeah, it was. I think the superintendent was the one who kind of worked to put those different groups together
Okay.
and kind of decide who was going to be there. It was funny. One person, she actually she was subbing for another person that day, and she wasn't on the original list, but she had come in for one of the sessions. And at the end of it, and she was very anti AI, like very, very, very anti AI. And by the end of it, the end of that first session, she was like, "Can I come back?" She's like, I need to be invited back. And not only did she come to the remaining sessions, she then started leading the work at her site.
I
And
love
this
that.
is another really beautiful thing. A lot of the kids were on their school site council. And if
Hmm.
they weren't, they were like, oh, I'm going to take this back to my site. Can you share your slides so we can go over that? Or they'll be like, oh, once you have the data that you collected, can you give us a summary so we can go back and share it at our sites? So it was really interesting to kind of see some of those things being asked for because one of the words that they landed on in their profile, this was the one word that unanimously across all surveys, stakeholders, every person had a different angle on, was advocacy. So it's just really beautiful, I think, to be able to bring bring people together. I think we live in a, I think right now, the biggest challenge that I see is we work too much off of assumptions. And I can't remember who said it, but there was somebody who had a quote that said, assumptions are like termites to a relationship. And I think I see a lot of that right now. I think there's just so many assumptions. And I think bit by bit by bit, relationships are eroding, trust is eroding on multiple things, not just in education, I think in multiple systems. And I
Yeah.
think the
Yeah.
easiest solution is it sounds so simple and it's like free, but you just need to get together in a room and talk to each other. And I think it really helps if you have a facilitator to come in and guide that conversation.
Well, I think one of the things that was guiding you, especially not only having the growth mindset and capacity, but was some of the work that Brene Brown has done with that wonderful four-letter word. And you had posted about it. So why don't you share with us
Yeah.
kind of how your Roseville Joint Union ended, but also the transformation of that word?
Yeah, it was really interesting because during like these last couple of months, so we just did this over the last like I think 3.5 months. And one of the things that you also see in parallel happening was, you had people like Reese Witherspoon. I think she was the big one for me because like she has no interest in AI. She's not an AI company. She wasn't being paid by anyone to say anything. But she posted something in her book club on Instagram, and she was like, what are people thinking about AI? She's like, have women? She's like, I asked my book club, and many of them were like, oh, we haven't done anything. So she's like, I think we should learn together. She's like, I see all my friends talking about it, my guy friends, she was saying, talking about AI. I think as women, we should learn about it. And the backlash that she got was unbelievable. Like it was shocking. Like I think a lot of people were really shocked. She got so much backlash, but she didn't
Huh.
apologize for it. She's like, look, I'm going to learn. She's like, I'm curious. This is here in our world. If you want to learn with me. And kind of like,
Yeah.
if you don't, then don't, you do you.
Right.
And
Right.
he wasn't the only person. Now there was another person, I think Mel Robbins, but Mel Robbins was doing a sponsored post for Microsoft. So I think
Yep.
you can kind of add that. But Reese Witherspoon was not. So that was one thing. I was just like, wow, like why are so many people so angry? And then the second thing, I think this one really, 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 I think struck a nerve with me was watching the students boo speakers at AI graduations, and not all of them. So it was interesting. Like it was basically just, I don't even have an answer to this yet. So I'm rambling now because I'm thinking out loud. But the one thing that made me think about, I started to think about what do people who are curious about AI, because there is a bit of an assumption, I think, that if you're curious about AI, then you are blind to all the challenges and whatnot. And this is very untrue. I am equally as excited about AI as I am afraid. And I always say the hardest thing right now is to hold both emotions. We can be excited and also deeply fearful. But if you are only fearful, what I've come to realize is the difference between people who are leaning in versus those who are opting out is the people leaning in, and this is just my hypothesis, I believe have agency.
Yeah.
In some way, shape, or form, we believe we can make a difference. We
Yeah.
believe we can shape this. We believe we have a voice. We believe if we get involved, we can design things, we can create things, we can, even if you look at me in my little world, just by me leaning in, I get to work with incredible school leaders and people to do things like the example at Roseville, right? By opting out and saying, hey, all these bad things are going to happen, and these are all the things, and these are reasons why we should protest, what does that get anybody? What is that going to get anyone? It's moving ahead with or without you. And so we kind of say it can move ahead by design, where we collectively come together and design it, or it's going to move ahead by default.
Right.
And you get a say in one of those. Might not be exactly what you want, but this is what I've started to learn is that people that are leaning in have agency. And if you look at where does agency come from, it comes from hope. It comes from you believe you can do something about something because you're hopeful for a future. You don't know what that outcome is going to be, but you have hope that you can impact something in some way. And so that's when I started researching and I learned hope is not an emotion. I used to think it was just a feeling, but it's not. Brene Brown has incredible research about how it's a cognitive skill, about how it's an entire thinking process you develop. So again, at a time when people are so upset about critical thinking and people aren't thinking, how I don't feel like we're leaning into what thinking even means, because it's definitely not writing a 5 paragraph essay. But if you lean into hope as a method of thinking, how do we teach hope as a cognitive process of thinking? Now you're like looking at just like being a human, I think, on a very, very, very different level. And we talk a lot, about like well-being and, all these other words that are out there. But I've really started to observe like we don't get granular enough into what we actually want it to like. What do we want to see? What do we want to hear? What do we want being produced to tell us, hey, yeah, we're on the right track?
Exactly, exactly. And that leads me to, you're talking about some of the schools, and Roseville has some neat projects going on. And so, with all that you're doing and all that you've seen, what are some trends or innovations in school designs that really excite you the most? Because I mean, you've been to some several countries right now that are, I would say, are much more cutting edge than what we're doing.
Yeah, I would say across the board, I don't know that like anyone's like more cutting edge than say like another person. What I would say that I see consistent across the board is a courageous leader. It's somebody who's like, I'm just going to bring these people together and we're going to figure it out. And what I would say that those people have in common is they invested in culture. So
Mm,
I think this is more than saying what's innovated. I will pull out this one challenge because I think if you can lean into solving for this and you can lean into this gap and you can begin to close this gap, you will get that innovation piece regardless. Whereas if you only talk about the innovation, but you don't talk about this gap, I think it's very hard to replicate what some of these people are doing. So that courageous leader brings people together and knows and has the relationships with people to bring them together to say, let's figure this out. And one of the things that allows them to delegate some of that autonomy, to delegate some of those things, is they have good culture and rapport. And so I think that culture piece, like what are our norms? What are our values? What are things we believe in? Like I always say, if you don't feel like your culture piece is there, get a story, get a really
mm,
strong story down. And your story is not AI. Your story is your community, what you believe, like like you said, like builder, designer, architect, like these are things we build, we create, not just in the physical sense, in the emotional sense as well. And the way you build in the emotional sense is through storytelling. And I think it's one of the reasons why people bring you in for a keynote. What do they want? They want you to give their people a story. But
right.
as great as keynotes are, and like, we love doing them, we love creating that motivation and inspiration, you need a story to follow it through. And so if you feel like the culture piece is weak, if you feel like there's too many voices and narratives, like these people are saying this about AI, these people are feeling this way, you'll always hear that. Oh, I have these people and they love it, but these people over here, this. And it's because those people have different stories. They've
Yeah.
co-created their own from social media, from whatever they're listening to, from whatever they're around, their own lived experiences. And if you don't bring them together under a shared narrative that has nothing to do with AI, but has to do with your vision, your mission, and is usually already done for you mostly on your website,
Yeah.
you need to put the pieces together and get that story in front of them and find a way to get your leaders, your principals, your building leaders, your site leaders, everyone to be integrating that narrative to work on some of those culture pieces. And I think once your culture pieces are intact, people, you can open up the door for let's figure this out. And people have the agency to then be like, okay, well, I want to work on this. I'm going to do this. I'm doing this. Okay, this person's doing this here. How do we share and scale this? I think you can have a bit more of that. So honestly, that's what I see. I see everywhere I go, there's just a leader who's just like, let's do this. We're going to figure it out, and we're going to kind of charge ahead in this direction. And I'm going to model. I'm going to model my use. I'm going to share those stories. There's another really great district that we work with, Community District High School 117 in Illinois. And the superintendent did something called Gemini Jams. And it was basically these, like, we put together 5 design challenges, like very quick, like 5-10 minute little challenges that you did over the course of an hour. And you could just sign up for either beginner, middle, or advanced. And the challenges kind of varied. And anybody who showed up, he got them a pro license.
Oh, that's
But it
amazing.
wasn't just like a sit and get everything. There was choice. There was, what do you want to learn? What track are you? It was really fun.
When we work with schools at K 12, it's not just about furniture design, it's about impact. Our radically student centered approach puts students at the center of every decision. From that first conversation to the final walkthrough, we're focused on creating spaces that actually work for the kids, the teachers, and the community. So if you're looking to do more than just check a box on your next project, let's talk. Visit K12.com. That's KAY twelve.com and see how we're helping schools transform learning one student at a time. Because at K 12, it's not just about projects and furniture, it's about purpose.
storytelling. It's an art, it's a science, it's intrinsic, it's extrinsic. So, you look at like our you musicians, rap artists, country, it doesn't matter, like they're storytellers. And I think it's powerful for us to teach that to our students. So if we walked in the doors of Dr. Sabba Quidwai's School of Hope, what would you want to have for the graduate of 2045 in design? What should we be doing differently right now for that graduate 20 plus years ahead?
I will say, I think agency is like it's so easy to use these words, but we
Yes,
don't realize how much like mental muscle you need. I don't even know if that's a word, but like just like muscle you need from a mental perspective to actually have this skill. It's really easy to be like, oh, just go have agency, just go design this, just go do this. It's like again, if I take it back to one of the things I love about your like, you said you have builders, architects, all of this. If you think about it, you do it in the physical sense and the emotional sense. And I think if you look at that parallel, if you look at the physical sense and you were to be like, oh yeah, just go build that building. Like, okay, how? Why? Just because I've got some wood in front of me and some tools that you think I can go build and construct like a whole thing that's not going to fall down in an earthquake or when everything starts to fall apart? Course not. There are certain things and structures and experiences that builders and architects and in the physical space are doing to ensure that tomorrow, if there is an earthquake, the house won't come falling down on you, right?
right.
Not in all cases, but in your best case scenario. So you can also think about this in an emotional or sort of a cognitive sense as well. That you can't just tell somebody to go and do this or just have agency and design this. They need experiences, they need skills, they need practice. And so I really think that like there are strategies, like evidence-based strategies that we have for teaching this. There's a really good book by these two professors from USC called Clark and Estes, and I want to say it's called Turning Research into Results. And they talk about how when we are trying to answer questions like the one you're doing or implementing initiatives like AI and whatnot, there are three areas you have to look at, and the three have to function together. The first one is knowledge. People need knowledge. They need training. They need PD. They need to understand. However, 80% of our focus tends to be knowledge only. And we forget, they say, the other two. The second one is motivation. Do I believe I am capable of integrating? Let's just take AI for an example. You just sat through a training of Gemini or a training of whatever, and now you don't even believe you're capable. You're like, well, I'm too old for this. This is too hard for me. The kids know more than I do. You can give that person all the training in the world. If they do not believe they are capable of something, this does nothing. And what I love about Clark and Estes' work is they break down motivation into so many different levels. So it's once I believe I can do it, do I have an area where I want to apply this, and can I sustain that? And
Yes.
to help this become successful, you need your organizational elements. If there's no time for me to collaborate with my peers, if I'm constantly being bombarded with other requests, if I, don't have a schedule that allows me, like if we don't start looking at these three areas together, doing one without the other gets you a void and you don't get that outcome that you're looking for. So I think all around this concept of agency isn't just for young people, it's really for everybody. How do you start giving people more hope that you can start doing things and taking it into your own hands? And it's a hard one because it's so much of it is mindset, but it's
Yeah.
one of those that like you don't believe it till you see it, but you don't see it until you believe it in some ways. I think if you start looking at I would just say start observing people who are thriving right now with AI, because there's no doubt that people are, and look at people who are not. And usually you will notice that that is the gap between them. One group just believes they can figure it out and they're willing to watch some YouTube videos. They're willing to do some things on a weekend when somebody else, whereas the other people I tend to find, they want somebody to fix the whole equation before they'll
Mhm.
start. No,
Yeah.
first get rid of standardized testing. No, our college admissions needs to change. No, this needs to happen. And people who figure things out, they're like, you know what? I'm just going to check those boxes and get it out the way, and I'm going to do my own thing. They maneuver around obstacles instead of saying, please get rid of all the obstacles and then I'll go and do X. And I see that gap pretty much everywhere I go between people
Yeah.
that are moving towards something right now and people who are not.
Right. And it's really evident, talking what you just said about see it, believe it, see it. Same thing goes, many people can't do it until they believe it until it's done, right? And like you said, the motivation, it comes from so many different sources, from our
Yeah.
teachers, from ourself, from others, right? And students have to have that. They have to have the champion, the person, the thing, the friend, something that helps give them hope, builds their agency, and motivates them. It's, yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. What what do you see from students, because you've been working a lot with them lately, if they were actually in charge of designing schools, what would be the very first thing you see would appear in every building?
So this one is tricky, okay? And again, I'm just going to put the caveat that like I'm not saying this is the answer. I'm just
Oh
saying
no,
the thing I observe. I
sure.
think there is so much these days about like student voice and bringing students in and da da da. Amazing. Bring in all your voices, bring in whoever you want. However, if your voices are not informed about where things are going and they do not have a shared knowledge base,
Hmm.
they are operating off of an old system, not a new one. And I'll tell you why I see this in students. A lot of people will bring students forward and be like, oh, well, what do you need with AI? And like, da 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 da. And one of the biggest things students will ask for is rules. I need to know what I can and cannot do. Why? Because they are used to a compliance model of education. Okay.
Yes.
Now, as adults, you have to recognize that while they want that standardization and they want to know, tell me what I can do, tell me what I can't do, give me the rules that I can follow to get what I need to get so I can check your boxes, is the number one thing most of them will ask for. Most of your students are not going to come to you and say, well, I'd really like to learn how to make good decisions with the technology. They'll get there eventually, but that's not what they're looking for, because they're looking at it in the context of, how do I make sure that my teacher doesn't get mad at me for using AI on this essay? That's
Right.
their frame. So if you are bringing in multiple voices, the very first thing you need to do is make sure we have a shared frame from which we are operating. Otherwise, what most people will do sometimes is they'll get that student survey, they'll get those student voices, they'll get that data, and be like, well, our kids need clear rules. Let's give them some traffic lights and tell them where they can use AI and where they can't. And there's a little bit of a responsibility on us to be like, wait a minute, is this the right method? Is this the right approach? But at the end of the day, they are young. This is the purpose of being an adult
Yeah.
and having experience and knowing how to look through different sources and different pieces of information and all of these different things. So I think no matter what voices you're bringing in, no matter what things, this is one thing I see when people bring in students that sometimes is a little bit, it can take you down a wrong path, even though you have the best of intentions. The second thing I'll say that we see is that this is a very neglected part of the conversation. When you go a layer deeper and ask them, why they're maybe misusing something, they're very honest in telling you what they are and aren't doing. We really neglect, and this is not because of AI, we've heard this from before, like the research has been there for so long. They are incredibly stressed. They are incredibly anxious. They are incredibly nervous about their futures. And they don't have enough people to talk to be like, okay, like, how do I figure this out? And again, it's like something else. You don't figure something out in a 45-minute lesson or one counseling session. This is, you need to, again, over time, have people help you see the frame or help you design the frame that you are going to construct yourself. Because I do think we're moving into a world where there will be multiple frames based on what you believe. If you're somebody who believes, hey, I can figure it out and I can launch a business and I can do XYZ, there are people doing that today, all ages, from 10 to 70. People are doing
Yeah.
this across the board. But you also have people who are stuck, who are just like, everything's broken, everything, everyone gonna get laid off. How do I do this? How do I do whatever? And one of the things that I think is important is when we do this with kids when they're younger, you don't have the pressure always. Of course, there's a different type of pressure, but it's very hard to kind of be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to think about starting a business and I'm going to lean into AI and I'm going to spend my weekends doing this. If you've got a partner, two kids, and you're paycheck to paycheck and you're worried about so many different things. And I think that's
Yeah.
the economic reality for so many people today.
Right.
And it's really a hard, that there's just no way around that, because we don't have good social infrastructure in our,
No.
a really good example, we don't have good infrastructure in general. I was just reading an article this morning about FIFA and how like a lot of the people who are coming are like, what do you mean you don't have a train? What do you mean I'm going to spend $100 on an Uber? What do you mean I'm going to spend, in New Jersey, they were saying they were charging $150 for a train ticket that would normally cost $19 because they can't afford the infrastructure. So I didn't know this, but I guess FIFA doesn't pay for a country to build the infrastructure and do all of these things. The incentive is supposed to be for the country because it's supposed to bring in so many people.
Right,
it's supposed to
right.
have tourism. It's supposed to do all these things. But between all the drama that we've had here, nobody wants to come. And so now they're struggling. They're like, we're not having the ticket sales. People's Airbnbs are not getting the revenue that they thought was going to come in. So like we have a lot of infrastructure challenges in general where like I wish more people spent more time talking about this than they did the environment, honestly, like, because the environment is a byproduct of not supporting your infrastructure in these ways, not supporting people in certain ways. And I don't know, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I do think there is a very harsh reality to address here that we do not have good social infrastructure for people. And over time, we've just created two really different economic realities that are very obvious in pretty much any city you visit. You have just people living in it's like that where I am. You have people living in two completely different worlds, completely different economic realities within just a couple miles of each other.
Right. The haves and the have-nots. And it's funny, so do you remember the movie Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner? It was a baseball movie, okay? And so, if you build it, they will come. That's your infrastructure argument times 10 for so many things, because you look at, lack of public trans and our roads and our this, right? So like if all these things were in place, FIFA would be sold out in 2 seconds, right?
Yeah.
And I think that limits so many different things in schools, in education, with humans, right? And, it's funny, you get from Winnie the Pooh, you get one Tigger in a room of 10 Eeyores. How is that Tigger going to thrive with his mindset when there's too many Eeyores telling him, it'll never work, right? That's a big challenge.
I will say there is one thing that I wish more people leaned into, because yes, even though we have these infrastructure challenges and whatnot, I do wish a lot more on a local level, local businesses partnered with schools and students. I think you would have every AI project, your AI literacy curriculum would be built right then and there. You wouldn't even have to do anything while giving kids real experience. Like if you taught kids like design thinking and like, hey, we're going to partner you with these small businesses, go in there, interview them about what they're working on, what they're trying to do. And like, okay, how can we use AI to come up with a solution for this business? I think there would just be so much more community engagement while helping kids build. We talk about like work-based learning, blah, blah. We want everything to be this like fully structured program. Whereas honestly, sometimes it's a matter of just going and being like, hey, can we do this together? Like, hey, can we come together? Every business would fall for that kind of experience and help right now, because so many small businesses don't even have any exposure to AI. They don't have the money to bring in consulting teams, like even being able to help a restaurant use AI, to run a marketing campaign, to do something. That experience of talking to people, building things, asking questions, this is all critical thinking that is, in my opinion, more valuable than like a 5-paragraph essay. So
no doubt.
There's so many small tweaks we can make that don't cost a lot of money, but they do cost courage. And courage is unfortunately very, very, very hard to come by.
Yeah, fear versus courage, right? And so many of the school districts that I speak with and these architect firms, when they involve community partners for either their CTE or their this or their that, the community wins. No doubt, hands down, the community wins, and all members, students, infants, pets, no matter what, because everyone gets agency, everyone gets a voice, everyone becomes a part of it. And that's huge.
Yeah. And I feel like we have AI tools today. Like if you would have saved something like this yesterday, I might sit in my like 10th grade world history classroom or US history classroom and be like, well, how in the world am I going to partner with a restaurant while I need to get through these content standards and do da da da. But today I can put that into AI. Hey, we need to hit this standard on World War II right now, but I also want to get my kids learning AI literacy and working with the community and getting them some experience. How do I merge this together in the same time frame? And to be able to, that's something I think for people would be really hard. But for your AI tool, it can whip that up for you in a couple of seconds. And what
Yeah.
I find is once people have a frame and they're like, oh, so you're talking about World War II and economic collapse of businesses and things that happened during wartime over there. Let's tie that into economic trends we're seeing currently right now. And how do we support an elevator? There's so many parallels we can bring into content and how we learn. But it requires, like I said, a little bit of that initiative to be like, to go and ask that question, to have the courage to say, okay, how might we, which is again, that design thinking mindset, right? So those are the kinds of things that I think AI can help us
Yeah.
with so much, things that we think are not possible. Your AI tool doesn't believe anything's impossible. It's a huge advantage to have somebody with you
Yeah.
24/7 who's going to be like, be delusional, like, you can do anything, but here's how you can do it. And you can tell it 50 reasons why you think it won't work. You can give it every constraint. It will work within it, down to here's how you could do this in 50 minutes if you really had to, right?
Yeah,
Which
but limitless. Like, I don't care what you tell me. No, it's going to work. I'll find a way, right? And so we love to ask all of our guests on the Better Learning podcast. We use a phrase called radically student centered, right? And that really helps us pave the way for what we do. So in Saba's mind, what does radically student center mean, or give us your thoughts on that phrase?
I feel like because I'm so inspired right now by Roseville, I would say radically student centered would just mean that you bring adults and kids together to have a conversation about what we design next. And not like, what do we need, whatever, but like, tell me about what it's like to be you right now. Tell me about what you're dealing with. Tell me about what's hard for you. Tell me about what you're excited about. Tell me about how I can help you more. And those are the conversations about us that then help us decide the role AI can play in addressing those things that, wow, why are kids struggling like that? Like with Roseville, another thing that came up was toxic competition. The kids are like, we all feel like we need to be the same. We are all competing. Like we don't get to be. It's so funny to hear from adults like, no, we want you to be unique and your voice and you're this. But if you ask the kids, they think everybody's trying to standardize them. We all are competing for the same grades. We're all competing for the same spots. We're all doing the same. We're not getting to really be who we are. So that's not an AI challenge. These are human challenges, but AI plays a role in helping us think through, solve through, create, and kind of get to, accelerating movement towards solving and creating some of these things.
And I think one of the points I just heard too is that, asking students' opinion, getting their ideas. And so like for adults to be malleable, to listen, to let it absorb and marinate from students, we ask them to do it all day. Why can't we do it with them? Right. I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time, being on the podcast. Once again, Better Learning Podcast, share with your friends, reach out to Sabba because her work is as good as it gets in so many realms. So be sure to follow her work, follow our podcast, and thanks again for being here, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
The Better Learning Podcast is produced by Matt Rogers and edited by Kelly Jones. The views and opinions shared on this podcast are those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily represent the perspectives of their affiliated companies, organizations, or associations.